Imagine waking up in the middle of the night to find your entire city burning. It's not just a building or a block, but nearly everything you've ever known consumed by flames. So intense, they created their own weather system. This isn't a disaster movie. This is exactly what happened in September 1666. When London experienced one of the most devastating urban fires in human history, the Great Fire of London burned for 4 days straight, destroyed over 13,000 houses, nearly 90 churches, and left 70,000 of the city's 80,000 residents homeless. But here's the shocking part. Officially, only 6 deaths were recorded. How is that possible? What can this 350-year-old disaster teach us today? I'm going to take you back to that September night when a small bakery fire spiraled into an inferno that changed London forever. Our story begins on Pudding Lane, a narrow street in the heart of London, just after midnight on September 2nd, 1666. Thomas Farriner, the king's baker, had finished his work for the day and gone to bed. But something went wrong. A spark from his oven ignited nearby firewood. For you watching from America, let me paint a picture of what London looked like in 1666, because it was nothing like the city you might visit today. Think of the tightest, most cramped neighborhood you've ever seen, then multiply that by 10. Houses were built so close together that neighbors could literally shake hands from their upper windows across the street. And here's the kicker. Almost everything was made of wood. Wooden houses with thatched roofs, wooden shops, wooden warehouses. The city was basically a tinderbox waiting for a match. London hadn't updated its building codes in centuries, and the medieval city had grown chaotically with no urban planning whatsoever. Thomas Farriner and his family woke to find their house filled with smoke. They escaped by climbing out an upper window and crawling along the rooftops to safety. Tragically, one of Farriner's maids was too frightened to make the climb and became one of the fire's first victims. By dawn, the fire had spread to several neighboring buildings, but here's where the real problem began. The summer of 1666 had been exceptionally dry, one of the driest on record. No significant rain had fallen for months, leaving everything parched and ready to burn. But it gets worse. That night, a strong east wind was blowing straight off the Thames River. Remember those cramped wooden buildings? The wind turned those narrow streets into wind tunnels, pushing flames from house to house like dominoes. The fire moved so fast that people barely had time to grab their belongings before fleeing. The Lord Mayor of London, Sir Thomas Bloodworth, was summoned to assess the situation around 3 a.m. In what would become one of history's most regrettable quotes, he reportedly looked at the flames and said, "Pish, woman could piss it out." He went back to bed. This dismissive attitude cost the city dearly. Those crucial early hours when the fire might have been contained were wasted. You see, fighting fires in 1666 was nothing like today. There were no fire departments, no fire trucks, and no pressurized water systems. The main firefighting technique was creating fire breaks, literally tearing down houses in the fire's path to create gaps it couldn't jump. But this required the Lord Mayor's authorization to destroy private property. And Bloodworth hesitated, worried about having to compensate property owners. By Sunday morning, London was in full panic mode. The fire was now consuming everything in its path: houses, shops, churches, even the Thameside warehouses, packed with combustible goods like oil, timber, coal, and spirits. These warehouses exploded like bombs, sending flames hundreds of feet into the air. What followed was a scene of absolute chaos. Imagine 80,000 people trying to evacuate a burning city with no cars, no trains, and only narrow medieval streets as escape routes. The wealthy loaded their possessions onto carts and boats on the Thames. The poor grabbed what they could carry and ran. The famous diarist Samuel Pepys, think of him as the 17th century blogger. Documenting everything provides our best eyewitness account. On September 2nd, he climbed the Tower of London and watched in horror as the flames spread. He immediately went to King Charles II and urged him to order the creation of fire breaks. The king agreed and even joined the firefighting efforts himself. That's right, King Charles II, one of England's monarchs, spent days in the streets covered in soot, passing buckets of water and helping to blow up buildings with gunpowder to create fire breaks. His brother, the Duke of York, led teams of soldiers and volunteers in fighting the blaze. This hands-on royal response probably prevented even greater disaster. But the fire seemed unstoppable. It consumed Cheapside, the commercial heart of London. It destroyed the Royal Exchange, where merchants conducted business. And on September 4th, it reached Old St. Paul's Cathedral. A s'more. Well, some honors. I see a predator without wild. Wasn't just any church, it was a massive Gothic structure that had stood for centuries. When the fire reached it, the lead roof melted, sending rivers of molten metal flowing down the streets. The stones exploded from the heat. Booksellers had stored thousands of books in the cathedral's crypt for safekeeping, thinking stone walls would protect them. Every single one burned. By Wednesday, September 5th, the fire had burned through 373 acres within the old Roman city walls and jumped the river Fleet to threaten the western suburbs. But then, finally, two things happened. The strong wind that had driven the fire for days began to die down, and firefighting crews, now reinforced by the king's guards, successfully created enough fire breaks to contain the remaining flames. When the flames finally died on September 6th, Londoners emerged to find their city unrecognizable. Over 13,000 houses had been destroyed. 87 churches were gone. Major landmarks like the Royal Exchange, the Custom House, and dozens of guild halls had been reduced to rubble. The once great St. Paul's Cathedral was a burned-out shell. Yet here's one of the most remarkable and puzzling aspects of this disaster. The official death toll was only 6 people. 6. In a fire that destroyed 4/5 of one of Europe's largest cities. How is that possible? Historians have debated this for centuries. The truth is, the real death toll was certainly much higher, probably in the hundreds. While many deaths went unrecorded, especially among the poor and working classes. Bodies may have been completely cremated in the intense heat, leaving nothing to count. The fire burned so hot in some places that it melted pottery and metal. Human remains would have stood a chance. Still, compared to other urban disasters, the death toll was relatively low. Why? The fire moved slowly enough that most people could evacuate. It burned mostly during daylight hours when people were awake. And the city's location on the Thames gave people an escape route by water. But if you survived, you faced a new nightmare. You were now homeless. 70,000 people, nearly 90% of the city's population, had lost their homes. Refugee camps sprang up in the fields outside London. King Charles II opened up royal parks for displaced families. The humanitarian crisis was enormous. In the immediate aftermath, wild conspiracy theories spread. Some blamed Catholics, others blamed foreigners. A French watchmaker named Robert Hubert falsely confessed to starting the fire and was hanged, even though evidence later showed he couldn't possibly have done it. The paranoia and scapegoating reflected the political tensions of the era. But once the panic subsided, London faced a choice. Rebuild the same cramped medieval city, or start fresh with modern urban planning. Visionaries like Christopher Wren proposed grand plans with wide boulevards and open squares. Unfortunately, property disputes and the sheer cost meant most of these plans were never realized. However, some crucial changes were made. A new law banned wooden buildings and required brick or stone construction. Streets were widened, at least somewhat. Christopher Wren got to rebuild St. Paul's Cathedral, creating the magnificent dome structure you can visit today, arguably more beautiful than the medieval original. The rebuilding took decades and cost millions, but London emerged stronger. The fire forced modernization that might have taken centuries otherwise. Today, you can still see the impact. The monument, a 202-foot column designed by Wren, stands near where the fire started, its height matching the distance to Farriner's Bakery on Pudding Lane. Ironically, the Great Fire may have saved lives in the long run. Just a year earlier, in 1665, the bubonic plague had killed 100,000 Londoners. The cramped, rat-infested medieval city was a perfect breeding ground for disease. By burning away the old wooden structures and forcing better sanitation and building standards, The fire helped prevent future plague outbreaks. The Great Fire of London teaches us that disasters can be catalysts for change. The same flames that destroyed medieval London made room for a modern city. The tragedy forced improvements in fire safety, urban planning, and building codes that cities worldwide would eventually adopt. So the next time you see a modern fire code, a wide city street, or a brick building with proper spacing, remember the September night in 1666 when London burned? And from those ashes rose a new vision of what a city could be. If you enjoyed this deep dive into history, don't forget to like, subscribe, and let me know in the comments what historical event you'd like to explore next. Thanks for watching.